Hi friends, my name is Mitch, and this is No Retreat, the Russian Front, a rapid refresher. Did you play the game? Forgot a few things? Coming back? This is what this is for. So this is your turn track. The symbols mean the number of blitz markers you get for the Allied side, or the number of shock markers you get at the beginning of the turn for the Russian side. You have various text for different rules for the different days, as well as you have a skull, which means a sudden death victory check, section 12.2. You basically would slide over here, and you want to look at the corresponding turn here. So when you see a skull on turn 6, for example, slide over here, and you find the T6, and if that particular side has more than that number of victory points, then you win the game as sudden death victory. Standard terrain effects chart. You would compare this to the terrain on the map. Movement points, that is tank versus anything else. This is armored versus infantry. In some cases, you'll get a bonus if you have armored versus infantry. Automatic defense shift based upon terrain. For example, on the mountain, you're going to have much bigger shift than you would in open territory. And doesn't stop advance after combat. Standard CRT with battle odds. There are a couple of shifts. We'll go over those in a second. Standard CRT explanations at the bottom. The white text means it cannot attack. The parentheses in white means no zone of control. The X means no combat strength at all. And the number on the right in black is the amount of movement points that he has. Fairly standard unit types: infantry, regional fortified shock, panzer, and panzer grenadier. Cards have a card number, they have an Axis event, and then they have a Soviet event. Turn phases start with the Axis, card phase, supply check, organization phase, movement, combat, marker and unit removal, and detraining. A player can only have 2 cards in his hand before doing a draw, so if he has extra cards, he must get rid of those. After the discard, player draws 4 cards, 1, 2, 3, 4, and adds those to his hand. Cards are drawn one by one and looked at because if you have this red text here, then you must immediately play the card. Supply is traced from a friendly city or a map edge. The map edges are colored to indicate which map edge is for which side. So obviously Moscow is a friendly city, but it only goes for 4 spaces though. So if you're 1, 2, 3, 4 spaces, then now you're still good for supply, but the minute you hit that extra space, now you're not good for supply. So obviously if Moscow gets taken over, then it's no longer a friendly city, and it's now no longer a good supply source, even though you're within 1, 2, 3, 4 spaces. But you can be within 1, 2, 3, 4 spaces of the map edge and be back into supply. There are other supply sources like a sea, for example, and those are in section 6.2 of the rulebook. Supply is also broken by enemy units as well. If a unit falls out of supply, he gets a no supply marker, and now the following conditions apply. He has movement is reduced to 3 movement points instead of how many is on his thing. He is ineligible for a flip step, and he has no zone of control. And if he's in combat, he never receives an armor bonus when attacking and cannot do multi-hex advance as well. Section 6.5 of the book. Reinforcement, replacement, and recovering units are brought into the map and placed with no movement point cost. There are various rules for what can be placed where, 7.6 of the rulebook, but if a unit comes out of the shattered unit box and comes onto the map, he must have a shattered or disorganized unit marker to indicate they cannot attack. Stacking rules: the Axis can stack up to 2 units. Soviets can only stack 1 unit or have 1 unit until turn 11, at which time they can stack a tank unit with another unit. So this unit, for example, with that unit. Standard zone of control, you're moving in. Once you hit the zone of control, you have to stop moving. However, if you want to move out, you must pay 1 additional movement point. Combat consists of the voluntary attacks. So this 4-3 unit, for example, wants to attack this 4-4 unit, which is on fairly even ground. After the voluntary attacks have taken place, I can, as a defender, place a counter blow marker on a different unit, and the counter blow marker will force the Soviets to attack it. Obviously, this is going to be advantageous because the 3-3 is going to lose pretty hard against the 7-6. So that's why you would want to use a counter blow. But this happens after the voluntary attacks have been declared. To do this, you also must, the defender who places the counter blow must get rid of a card out of his hand in order to do so. At this point, the attacker may introduce his shock or blitz markers. He can only use 1. So in this case, I want to use a shock marker and on this particular attack, followed by the defender. Then the attacker, followed by the defender, may each play 1 event card that is used during the battle. This occurs before the dice are rolled. Now you start applying shifts in the CRT after you do the battle odds, and those could be terrain effects. It could be support markers, for example, the shock or the blitz. It also could be armor bonus. In other words, I have a tank versus a non-tank has a possibility of an armor bonus. Standard advanced after combat rules apply. However, you can also get a second advance after combat hex in certain conditions, 10.8.1. And during clear weather turns only, a German type unit whose advance after combat has not been stopped after the second one can also do a third. Soviet armor types can do a third advance after combat only after turn 11. So how does weather affect things? A clear game turn has no special effects. A mud, all units have a maximum of 3 movement points. 1, 2, 3. There are no armor bonus shifts in combat, and multi-hex after advance is not permitted. During snow, the German player uses a Soviet combat table for all the attacks. On the first snow turn of the game, shock markers provide 2 shifts to the right, 1, 2 shifts to the right, instead of just 1. All units have a maximum of 4 unit movement points. Rivers freeze and have no effect. In other words, they have no terrain combat shifts. And that is a quick rule refresher for No Retreat, the Russian front.